Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Isaac. I am going to be your facilitator for today. Thank you for coming. This is one of 3 data sovereignty workshops that will be taking place within the community. We are going to be going through multiple different things. We'll be talking about CARE, we'll be talking about OCAP, we'll be talking about the significance of data sovereignty and why it's something that should be pursued and maintained. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. We have an opening prayer that is going to be done by Roseanne Martin. We also have members from DFO. We have Mr. Lee Croft and David Colster here with us today. We also have members of the GNU staff. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. We will be moving forward at a steady pace as best as possible. During the time, if there's questions of anybody in the facility, that's great. Feel free to ask your questions. For those of you who are online, we encourage you to ask questions at any time as well. We do have a moderator there for you, so your questions will be asked or at least answered to the best of our ability. So for those of you who are unaware of the facility, just a little housekeeping information. The bathrooms are located at the back. We also have tea and coffee here to the left with some minor refreshments. So moving forward, I hope we have a good day today, and I hope we encourage more individuals to show up for the workshops to come. And lastly, I would like to bring up Roseanne Martin for our opening prayer.
No mic?
Just right to the...
Okay. Well, you actually program Sidwen. Nin dala with your Roseanne. Stick with your watch, Nanin, and wish them anyway. And I'm going to get to watch a big please. My spiritual name is Skywide Eagle. Mega Mock from Listigouche. And I got a bad case of vertigo right now. I've had it since Sunday, so bear with me if I fall forward a little bit. But it's been a tough 4 days. Plus, I've been up since 6 o'clock this morning doing the sunrise ceremony down the powwow grounds for our upcoming powwow. But we're also taking this time to honor Don H. Capelin, one of our elders that passed away almost a month ago from this community. So I was given the task of lighting that fire this morning. So it's not easy standing before a sacred fire, and you got the head spinning and all that. So it was kind of tough this morning doing my pipe. I'm not going to do any smudging right now because it triggers my allergies. So I'm walking around with a heavy load, let's put it that way. Kisu welali nandel mawidaya nigegis ko kuladet uchidai ja hinu akai ja hakiktikik. Anyway, welali uchidna nandel bidaya kuladet atandes yokai udi wokai computer to nigegis ko welali uchidna. Mujigis nagos at logwes nugumizin and depuns at welali uchidel go and mohelo the book days agis 60 welali uchidna. Kiji den make it down when you get Sudan there's a gilan port of an Jordan. Well, Arling should have some one day to get a me and peaceful will Arling should image cheap cheese, Reese's cheese, of town there's a Nikwek, gilan port of an Gagis for 60 will Arling should not. He books his arm and Joxiben, Wiggamon Gagis for to go, which it way the Gagis for. He bent for being Nadia and Jordan on a gaga and Michiwaji on there's to see game wood, you go set come. Now Wiggamon not Nigagis for Chukudano, which it way we let it negate his my diet. Kalali na sabi we David epides no gabi de wixi chamish ibem ko binade al jolo bunaga no sit kwezi jimino a hebiji na we gamon no to widano wa bek bakta sam gibem ko binade al jugu des nige gisku bitti kwalia tandel ma we dai nige gisku kaladat kalali na makta we queen at kasnu tinum we xi chamish imni jolo bun gelo kun pisonade na jugari bides na gelo ke we nige gisku kaladat tandel ma we dai Ibem ko binade alano jolo mo nagaga no si tinamo na wigomon no nigegis ko mawida das na nigegis ko asankyo agado naman sai si tango ko elo kada mi sulai kinu alali chidna pabek muino kadno kabit kinapem ko bio na de alano jolo mo nagaga no si gizu ko mi majumino wa kizigwis na bibani ke si nigegis ko which is ko we dokso mawida nas nigegis ko chkwad bi ekalo please di kana ma si di kinu tandelia with this no si dai nigama kami Mika mawe iktu. Whoa. Lali chidna. Tangwani pe mahadudi shani o sun dance, ghost dance, moon dance, rain dance. That we go no niggas which is way we dox blooded. 10 days of your nogama. So basically what I usually say pray for is a 7-directional prayer that was taught to me by Don H. Capelin for one. For all the elders that have been in my life and all that, that have trained me over the 31 years that I've been following this journey and all that. I thank the Creator for the gift of life, for allowing me another day on Turtle Island, for allowing me another beautiful day to be able to be with my people and all that. As I said earlier, I'm having vertigo right now and I see multiple of you floating around, so just bear with me a little bit. I thank our Mother the Earth for the water, for the fish, for the animals, the 4-legged, the 2-legged, the winged ones, the creepy crawlies, the plant life. I thank the Creator for giving us all that. I also ask the ancestors from the Eastern Door, the Eagle Spirit, to come in and share with us today. They sit in that direction there to take care of the children that are coming, the children that are here, the children that are getting ready to go back through the Western Door. I ask for our ancestors, the grandmothers that sit in the Southern Door, the White Wolf. She's the caretaker for the women's ceremonies and teachings and all that. I also ask for the blessings for the women in our communities and all that, those that are having hard times. I ask that Black Bear in the West, the guardian for the men, to bring good medicine for our communities, for our land, for our waters, for our people, and to take care of each and every one of us. I also thank the ancestors from the Northern Door who sit in that direction there to take care of the elders, the pipe carriers, the lodge keepers, the ones that do the ghost dance, the moon dance, the rain dance, and other ceremonies and all that. So basically, in all, this is how I cover the 7-directional prayer each and every day. Before I get up in the morning and when I go to bed at night, I thank the Creator for the gift of life. But Alia for inviting me to do your opening. Sinogama. We'll fight them out.
Thank you very much, Roseanne. Much appreciated. Thank you. So moving forward, we are going to get into some of the background of Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous data sovereignty. So I will be calling on John McCare to come up and give a presentation. Then I will later ask Mr. Lee Croft as well to come up and give a presentation. So moving forward, Mr. John McCare.
Thank you, Michael. Louise John Mervyn Vicaire, Gespe'gewa'gi, Gespe'gewa'gi. Thank you. I want to say thank you. My name is John, and I'm from Gespe'gewa'gi. We're going to be talking about a very important topic today. We're going to be talking about Indigenous data sovereignty and data governance. And in this first workshop, we're going to be covering the basics of data sovereignty. And to understand the importance of data sovereignty, we must look at the context of how data involving Indigenous communities has been mishandled in the past. So we're going to be taking a look at the historical context and also how it relates to cultural sensitivity, how it relates to self-determination and empowerment, and how Indigenous data sovereignty also relates to strengthening relationships and building trust. So one significant example of how data was mishandled in the past, we can look at residential school records. These records were controlled by government and church authorities without the consent and authority from Indigenous communities. This created challenges for families seeking to understand their history, as well as the impacts of the residential school system. Museums and academic institutions have often collected cultural artifacts and knowledge from Indigenous communities without permission. Sacred items, traditional knowledge, and even human remains were taken, studied, and displayed without respecting their culture, significance, and ownership. Historical health data collection involved invasive studies on Indigenous populations without proper consent. For instance, nutritional experiments were conducted on Indigenous children in residential schools without their knowledge or the consent of their families. Land use and environmental data. Information about Indigenous lands and resources was frequently collected by governments and corporations to support development projects. This often led to land dispossession and environmental degradation without adequately consulting or compensating the affected communities. Early anthropological research treated Indigenous peoples as subjects rather than participants. Researchers documented languages, customs, and personal stories, which were then published and used without any benefit to the communities themselves. And government censuses have historically misrepresented Indigenous populations by categorizing and reporting them inaccurately, leading to a lack of appropriate services, resources, and further marginalizing Indigenous communities. These historical examples demonstrate the need for Indigenous data sovereignty. By controlling their data, Indigenous communities can ensure it is managed ethically and used to support their needs, rights, and aspirations. Cultural sensitivity is important when working with Indigenous communities, especially in the context of data collection and research. It ensures respect and honor of traditions, values, and practices. Cultural sensitivity means understanding and respecting the unique traditions, spiritual beliefs, and practices of Indigenous communities. And these elements are integral to their identity and well-being. Ethical research practices must align with ethical standards of the community. This includes seeking permission, ensuring informed consent, and involving community members in the research process. And it's important to use appropriate language and communication methods. This might involve translating materials into Indigenous languages, using culturally relevant metaphors, and ensuring that communication is clear and respectful. Certain knowledge, such as sacred stories, rituals, medicinal practices, should be protected and not shared publicly without explicit permission. Respecting these boundaries is essential to maintaining cultural integrity. And by practicing cultural sensitivity, we can ensure our interactions and research with Indigenous communities are respectful, inclusive, and beneficial, fostering trust and collaboration. I just want to give a shout out to this picture here. We have Lashani currently working for Ginu, very photogenic, great picture. Self-determination and empowerment are central to Indigenous data sovereignty. They ensure that Indigenous communities have the authority and capacity to control their own data, make decisions and reflect their values and needs. Self-determination is the right of Indigenous people to make their own choices about their lives, cultures, and futures. This includes the authority to govern themselves and to manage their resources without external interference. When Indigenous communities own and control their data, they can use it to support their governance, planning, and development goals. Access to accurate records and relevant data enables communities to make informed decisions that align with their values, priorities, and needs. Data control allows Indigenous communities to influence policies that reflect their lives. They can present data to advocate for their rights, resources, and interests. And data can support legal claims, land rights, and treaty negotiations, ensuring decisions are based on accurate and culturally relevant information. Data sovereignty supports comprehensive community planning, helping to identify strengths, address challenges, and set long-term goals. Controlling their data enables communities to ensure transparency and accountability in their governance structures, building trust within the community. Building capacity within the community through training and education in data management, research methods, and technology is crucial. Involving youth in data sovereignty initiatives fosters leadership and empowers the next generation to continue advocating for their rights. Data sovereignty helps preserve traditional knowledge by ensuring it is recorded, stored, and shared according to cultural protocols. Communities can use data to support language revitalization efforts, documenting and teaching Indigenous languages to future generations. And data sovereignty also enhances community resilience by enabling communities to plan for and respond to natural disasters, climate change, and other challenges. It supports sustainable resource management, ensuring that natural resources are used in a way that benefit the community and future generations. Self-determination and empowerment are integral to Indigenous data sovereignty. By controlling their data, Indigenous communities can ensure it is managed ethically and used to support their needs, rights, and aspirations. How does it relate to strengthening relationships and trust? First, respectful engagement means honoring the community's autonomy and values. This includes seeking permission and ensuring informed consent. Consistency is key. Maintaining reliable communication and actions builds trust over time. So follow through on commitments and be dependable. A collaborative approach involves the community in all stages of the research process. This ensures their voices are heard and their priorities are reflected. Working towards shared goals that benefit both the community and researchers helps align interests and fosters a partnership based on mutual respect. Open communication is crucial. Be clear about your research goals, methods, funding sources, potential outcomes to prevent misunderstandings. Establish feedback mechanisms to see the community can provide input throughout the research process. This shows that their opinions are valued and considered. Long-term commitment, build sustainable relationships so that go beyond individual projects. Long-term engagement shows that a commitment to the community's well-being and development. Provide continuous support and resources even after the research project has concluded. This helps maintain a strong and positive relationship. Mutual benefits. Ensure that research outcomes benefit the community. This could include sharing findings, supporting local initiatives, or providing tangible resources. By respecting data sovereignty principles, we can build stronger relationships between Indigenous communities and external organizations. This fosters trust and collaboration, leading to more ethical, effective, and mutual beneficial research programs. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the workshops. You see the agenda? Yeah. So today, we just kind of completed the workshop background. After we're completed with this agenda item, we're going to be posing a engagement question. We're going to be having a discussion on that question. There's going to be another discussion about the desired outcomes and community goals. We're going to have our lunch break. After lunch, we're going to be talking about definitions and interpretations of Indigenous data and Indigenous data sovereignty, followed by another engagement question. We're going to have a discussion on that. And then our final presentation will be an introduction of care and OCAP principles. For our second workshop on August 15th, we're going to do a recap of workshop 1. We're going to present care and OCAP principles again, but diving just a little bit deeper into the principles. We're going to be talking about an example of data management experience from the Gino perspective. Again, we have another question and discussion. After lunch on the workshop 2, we're going to be going into the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, Indigenous Peoples' Rights and Data, concepts and discussions so far, tying in discussions that we've had into the GIDA, Indigenous Peoples' Rights. We're going to be talking about another Gino data management example that specifically relates to OCAP and care principles, followed by another engagement question, having a discussion, and then our brief summary. So the second workshop is more focused on studying experiences around data governance and data sovereignty. And in our third workshop, we're going to be looking at ways to put data sovereignty into practice. So how to leverage OCAP and care principles to operationalize Indigenous data sovereignty. We're going to be taking a look at data sharing agreements, how they can be used to support Indigenous communities in their data sovereignty goals. We're going to be talking about how put protocols and data sovereignty agreements, data sharing agreements, support what we would like to see in the assertion of data sovereignty. DFO is going to be talking a little bit about their data sharing agreements. And then Guinea's perspectives on how to leverage data sharing agreements to support data sovereignty. Followed by another engagement question, having that discussion, and a brief summary of workshop 3. So at this point, I'd like to invite Lee Croft to come and give a background from DFO perspective.
Thanks, John.
So my name is Lee Croft. Very grateful to be here today in Gespe'gewa'gi in the Gespe'gewa'gi district of Mi'kmaq territory. I've come here from Anishinaabe, Algonquin territory in Ottawa, which is where I live and I work. I'm a policy advisor with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, or DFO. One of the main things that I'm working on is putting together a departmental framework to look at data ethics and responsible use of artificial intelligence. And we feel that a very important part of this framework needs to be respecting Indigenous data sovereignty. We need to look at how to make this a very central part of what the department needs to understand about interacting with data. So I'm really looking forward to hearing a lot of thoughts and perspectives from people through these workshops on what it is that we need to be doing around this. So I want to build a little bit on what John has introduced around Indigenous data sovereignty and give a little bit of the DFO Fisheries and Oceans perspective and a bit of context around that. So DFO, as a federal department that regularly interacts with Indigenous data, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're respectfully interacting with this data in a way that aligns with community interests and that it's not going to cause harms in how the data is being used. But we have yet to fulfill respect for Indigenous data sovereignty. So we have work to do to actually act on these responsibilities. And interactions and use of Indigenous data for the government of Canada in general, it's an area where there have been a lot of harms that have been caused in the past. So John spoke to a little bit of this. There have been many bad data management practices, a lot of issues around this that need to be addressed. So we recognize that there's quite a bit of distrust right now in the government to actually do the right thing when it comes to working with Indigenous data. So our hope is that we can work through these workshops to improve relationships in this area, to move forward in actually fulfilling our responsibilities around this. And one of the ways that I'm hoping we can start to do this is to have some conversations around what you would like to see from us, what communities would like to see DFO doing in order to properly respect visions of data sovereignty. So I think in order to move forward in doing this, it's important for us to begin from recognizing harms that have been caused through these past data management practices and through ongoing data management practices. So this spans across all different types of data, different contexts in which it's used. A lot of times when we're talking about data, we're thinking of this in a digital context, but as John introduced, there are other physical forms of data as well. So this is very broad in terms of what it applies to. And there have been some improvements within the federal government over the years in data management practices, but it's definitely something where there's still a lot of issues that exist, a lot of things that need to be addressed. So we have this responsibility, both for the government of Canada and specifically for DFO, to respect Indigenous data sovereignty, and we need to understand how to do that. So to see examples of where there have been issues and where there are still issues around this, I think one thing that stands out very clearly is with the Access to Information Act. So people may be familiar with this. Through the Act, there's a mechanism where people can put in requests to the Government of Canada to get access to data or to information that it holds. So on one hand, this is something that can be useful for communities to get access to their data that the government has. But on the other hand, anyone can put in these requests. So someone outside of the community can also put in the same type of request. They may get access to the data. And this could be problematic if that data shouldn't necessarily be shared with other people. So this presents issues in terms of being able to protect community level privacy around data, around information that should not be more broadly shared. There was a review for the Access to Information Act that was done in 2020 with Indigenous engagement, and there was a report that was put together through this, which is highlighting a number of issues that were identified. One of the things that was highlighted in that report is that even though this mechanism is there to get access to data, a lot of times this ends up creating a very lengthy and burdensome process to go through. It doesn't align very well with the needs of communities. And a lot of times it actually just ends up with requests that get rejected. So even though the mechanism is there, it's not always serving the purpose for communities to get access to their own data. So it's still this barrier that's in the way, and really there should not be this type of a barrier for getting access to that data. And it also raises concerns in the sense that sometimes these requests are needed to get data for court cases against the federal government. So there's this big conflict of interest in terms of how the government holds the data, controls the mechanism to get access to the data, and then that data might be used against it in court cases in federal courts. So really that calls into question the appropriateness of the federal government as the steward of certain types of Indigenous data. Another issue that was highlighted in this report is that there is a way through the Act that data can be protected against requests. This could happen if information or data is provided in confidence to the federal government coming from another government. But the issue with this is that the Act has a very narrow definition of what it considers to be an Aboriginal government. So in practice, that actually can't be applied a lot of the time because it just doesn't fall into what the Act considers an Aboriginal government to be. So that mechanism is there, but it's not really doing what's needed to provide community level privacy around data, to prevent access to data for those who should not have access to it. So just looking at this Access to Information Act, I think it's pretty clear that even with these modern practices around data and information, there are definitely issues here that need to be addressed in order to properly respect Indigenous data sovereignty. And those issues exist at the whole of government level. They also exist within the individual departments. So for us within DFO, there are definitely systemic barriers here that are preventing us from properly respecting Indigenous data sovereignty. Because the department holds a lot of Indigenous data, the way that data gets managed, the way it gets used, that may not be aligning with prioritizing Indigenous interests. It may be looking at prioritizing departmental interests or other interests. So we need to look at what policies or what guidance need to be in place to make sure the data is not going to be misused. And the issues are not only at the departmental level, there are also challenges at the individual employee level in terms of having appropriate guidance and information on how people should be interacting with data. We have not so far had guidance around how to ethically interact with data. That's something that we're currently working on putting together. But kind of up to this point, teams and individuals have been left on their own to navigate what does it mean to ethically interact with data? And more importantly, what does it mean to respect Indigenous data sovereignty? So we need to make sure that that type of information is provided for employees as well so that they can understand how to navigate this. The issues that I mentioned around the Access to Information Act, those apply within DFO as well because we're subject to that act. And another thing that we need to think about is the culture shift that needs to come along with this. So right now, colonial data management practices are very much embedded within the department and within how people operate in their day-to-day interactions with data. So beyond just putting together policy materials and guidance to indicate what the department should be doing, we need to make sure that people understand this as well. So we need to be able to socialize this information. We need to provide appropriate training materials so that it's not just going to be that we have guidance saying what to do, but people really understand why this is important and what they can do to actually put it into practice. So those are areas where we're hoping to be able to make improvements in terms of what we can learn from doing workshops like this and working together to put together guidance materials that can help to move in this direction. One thing that I want to go into a little bit more detail about is the idea of who is actually benefiting from how data is being used. So whose needs are being prioritized. This, I think, is very important if we think about the impact that data has on decision-making processes. So data is essentially giving us a way of interpreting and understanding reality. It gives us a representation of that reality. So we use it to inform ourselves about how we're going to make decisions or how we would interact with that reality. So what data is being collected, how it's being interpreted and analyzed and used, that all has a really big impact on how we make decisions about how we're going to operate. So if we're not careful in how we're doing this, if we're not doing it ethically, there's a lot of potential for harms to be caused as a result of decisions that we're making from this. To give an example around that, suppose that we're looking at fisheries data, depending on what type of data we're collecting, how we're looking at that, this might be used in a way that could paint a picture where it's very much going to prioritize the interests of commercial fisheries at the expense of Indigenous fisheries. So we need to be really careful that we're following practices that respect Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous rights so that we're not going to run into those types of pitfalls. And I do want to clarify a little bit that when I'm talking about this, the work that we're looking at doing, the focus is not on the decision-making processes themselves. It's not on fisheries management, for instance, but it's on the data management and how we interact with that data to make sure that we are doing that in an ethical manner, so that when that data feeds into decision-making processes, whether it's fisheries management or anything else, that those in turn are going to have that influence of doing this in an ethical manner, respecting Indigenous data sovereignty and respecting rights for how these decisions are actually being made. So there's a lot of reasons why it's important for us to get this right, but we need to look at what we can do to actually move forward with this. So one way that I think the role of the Government of Canada has been made fairly clear is through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, the Action Plan specifically. So this lays out a number of actions or measures which are giving information about what should be done by different departments in support of Indigenous rights and reconciliation. And among those, one measure, so Shared Priorities Measure 30, this is focused around supporting Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous-led data strategies. It's framed in the context of providing support for the capacity to control and manage and use and protect data, to support delivering effective services to peoples, to use data for telling stories, to participate in federal decision-making processes, and to realize visions of self-determination. Now, this is not an action plan measure that DFO is a lead on, but it is one that every department can contribute to and can participate in. So we see an opportunity here for DFO to be able to contribute to this by, first of all, looking at what can we do to embed respect for Indigenous data sovereignty within the department. So to make sure that we are doing that within DFO, and then to look at how can we share information about this, results, lessons that have been learned with other departments as well, so that we can hopefully help them to advance their own state of respecting Indigenous data sovereignty. So trying to look at how we can broaden these efforts to have a larger impact outside of just DFO. Another measure that I think is very relevant to this is Shared Priorities Measure 40. This one is on looking at respecting and integrating Indigenous knowledge as a distinct knowledge system within the management of fisheries, fish habitat, conservation, marine safety, protection of the marine environment. This is a measure that DFO is a lead on, So there's a lot of work that's already underway around this. But I think there's a strong opportunity here to really tie in Indigenous data sovereignty in terms of looking at things like understanding the relationship between Indigenous data and Indigenous knowledge, in terms of what are the commonalities, the connections between these, where are their differences. So understanding that type of a relationship, and then looking at how Indigenous data sovereignty can help to safeguard and make respectful use of Indigenous knowledge. So one thing that we hope is through work like these workshops that we can look at ways to help advance these action plan measures. So there's definitely a lot of benefits that can come from getting this right. We're looking for ways to really make this a reality within DFO. And to do that, we need to have appropriate guidance and information, both at the departmental level and at the employee level on how to approach this. So we see this opportunity to take that type of information and build it into a data ethics and responsible artificial intelligence framework that's currently being developed. So this is part of broader efforts within the department to put together this framework. It will apply to the whole of department, so it will be applying to everyone working within DFO. And doing this would really give us a chance to make sure that the way the department understands its responsibilities around ethical interactions with data and with artificial intelligence, that Indigenous data sovereignty would be a very core component of that. It would be a foundational part of how the department actually looks at these things. So I think it's really important that we do take this opportunity to build that in there. And there are different ways we can do this. We can put together materials like guiding principles, processes, things essentially to clarify what the expectations are for employees and for the department, and to provide information about how to actually put that into practice. And this framework that I'm talking about, it's really looking at two domains. So there's the data ethics side, and then there's also responsible artificial intelligence. Our focus in this work is really on data ethics, first of all. We want to make sure that we have a very good, solid understanding of this before going into greater complexities. Artificial intelligence is something that's gaining a lot of traction and a lot of usage, and it's definitely important to look at how does that connect to Indigenous data sovereignty? What do we need to be considering there? But because there's a lot more complexity and intricacies to that, we want to make sure that we understand this, first of all, in terms of working with data and looking at data ethics. So have that as a foundation there, and then we can build on that to get to other aspects as well. And we are looking at materials that would be part of a departmental framework, but we recognize that because this is directly tied to the rights of Indigenous peoples, this isn't something that we can just do on our own. We can't internally develop this by ourselves. It needs to be done as co-development. So we need to be looking at how can we work together to make sure that we have a proper understanding and proper respect for differences that might exist. So distinctions around different values, different worldviews, different ways of interpreting what does data sovereignty actually mean to different peoples and in different contexts. So we want to make sure that we are doing this together so that this is going to properly reflect all of those distinctions, and it's going to take all of that into account. So we're hoping that we can work towards that type of a goal of co-development through doing workshops like this. So this series of 3 workshops. So we've had this really great opportunity to work with John and to work with Mikey in planning these out. So I think this gives us this chance to start having these discussions to build up shared understandings, to get into talking about some of the deeper issues. And then we can start to look at what can we actually do in terms of co-creation of materials? What can we build together that's going to have a positive impact here? So I think there's a really good chance to have concrete outputs coming out by the end of the 3rd workshop. As John was talking about going through the overview there, at the end, we would be looking at information around data sharing agreements, and we may be able to produce some concrete materials coming out of that can actually be implemented within the department. So really interested in seeing what we can do there. And anything that we do around this, we want to make sure that we are being respectful of the intents and the desires of what everyone who's participating would like to see. So we will be checking to make sure that anything that we're recording in terms of information, that we have properly interpreted what people are saying and what the intents are behind that. And anything that we would do in terms of making use of results coming out of this, we'll definitely want to check that it's that everybody is comfortable with how we might be making use of that. So we'll kind of be checking for feedback from people and making sure that everything is moving in a direction that everyone is comfortable with. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for listening to what I've had to say on this, and thanks for being here and having a willingness to participate. A lot of these sessions are really going to be focused around your own perspectives and discussions. So I'll be taking a little bit of a step back just to listen and to learn from what people have to say. But we will be here as well to participate as appropriate and to share information. So thank you again, and looking forward to working on this together. I don't know if we have time to do questions now, or
We could, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Croft? So we'll just have you come back to the podium.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Access to Information Act, that one will protect against requests that come in if it's a government that is recognized by the Act. But there's so it provides a list of what Indigenous governments are recognized on it, and it's really pretty minimal. So it's useful if the government is listed there, but if it's not, then it's not going to be of use to anyone. So one of the things that is being looked at right now, there's continued review of the Act, is looking at how that could be improved upon. So hopefully there will be ways that there could be more governments that would be recognized through this. There are also exemptions under certain departments for the Act. I don't recall all of the departments. DFO has kind of a partial exemption to that within the Fisheries Act. So certain information that's provided to the department, specifically under the Fisheries Act, can have that type of exemption in terms of protection from request for access to information. But again, it's not going to cover everything. So we need to figure out ways to actually deal with this. Because basically, if the department holds the data, unless there's one of those exemptions, it is subject to that Act. There's nothing that we can really do to prevent releasing that information if a request comes in. So that's one of the reasons why, if DFO is the steward of the data, that might not always be the best way to actually approach things. So an alternative to that, which can protect against the Act, is if the department is not the steward of the data, if instead it's communities who are holding their own data. But to do that, it's necessary to figure out how is that actually going to work in terms of having capacity, having kind of the hardware, the equipment, the servers that are needed, training personnel to be able to manage that. So that's the direction that I think things may move in eventually, but it's a matter of building up the capacity for that and figuring out how is it appropriate to make this transfer of data over. And that's actually on the Shared Priorities Measure 30 that I mentioned from the UN Declaration. There's an interdepartmental working group that's focused around that measure. And one of the areas that they're looking at is similar to that. It's the sort of transfer of data from federal government departments back to Indigenous peoples for them to hold and manage their own data. So there are efforts looking at this, but I would say it's not very far advanced yet. There's nothing concrete coming out of it right now. But yeah, those are my thoughts on where that's going. I'm sorry? The working group is it's mostly Ottawa based, so it's a working group of different federal departments. It's co-led by Indigenous Services Canada and by Treasury Board of Canada. It's DG level, so it's kind of Director General, kind of higher management. So because of that, the conversations are not so much at the working level. Those conversations are much more at the policy level and thinking about changes that may need to be made to legislation to support this. So it's unfortunately very slow moving because of that. I don't expect to see things coming out of it quickly, but I think it is for longer term efforts an important group that can help with some of these things. Yeah. Yeah, there's not a great answer to it currently. Thank you. Any other questions, or if anyone just wants to make comments on kind of what I've talked about in general? Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. So we will be moving into our engagement question. So for those of you who are online, we would recommend you communicate with the moderator to express yourself or to put things in what you would like to have, which I see now you actually already have the question, which is good. So for those of you who are here on site, I would recommend coming up and grabbing a Post-it easel for your table, and kind of it'll give you the opportunity to kind of mark down your ideas and put things to paper, and we can post those on the wall so we can kind of see where we are at that point. Everybody does have an agenda on their table, so the question is there, and the question is as follows: where do you feel there is a need for better data management practices within the Government of Canada and DFO in its relationship with communities? So this is going to take us into our health break, along with the engagement question. So I would encourage you to get up, grab a coffee, maybe a water, get some refreshments, and go back to your tables and just have general discussion about what you feel, would be better data management. And we'll come back again at around 11:10, and we'll have those discussions of our findings at that point. So again, come up and grab your easels and your markers, and let's have some good discussion. Thank you. Okay, everybody, it is currently 11:30. So we are going to get into our engagement question discussion. We do see that there are some questions that are online that are given from individuals who were in the chat. So we are going to, first and foremost, before we start the discussion, because we don't want to leave anybody out, we're going to ask Mr. Leecroft to come back up again and address some of the questions that were specifically directed at him, and other questions that were directed at DFO as well. So.
Thanks, Mikey. Yeah, so I was just having a look through the chat, just trying to filter what was put in here as an answer to the engagement question, what was asked to me as question. So I think there were a couple for me. One was asking if DFO is having workshops with non-Indigenous fishing organizations to keep them informed. So right now we have not organized any workshops with non-Indigenous organizations. What we've been doing so far as a starting point to this is doing these types of workshops, reaching out through the AROM networks, the Aboriginal Aquatic Resources and Oceans Management Network. So we're doing the series with GINU here. We're also doing a workshop with Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, and we're doing a series of workshops with the Island Marine Aquatic Working Group and Kulanimutsun Aquatic Resources Society on the West Coast on Vancouver Island. So I think those are going to inform the initial direction that we need to take with this. We're going to be continuing to reach out to do additional workshops and additional work as we're able to, depending on the capacity and the funding that's available for this. Certainly, we recognize that we need to reach out in terms of having greater understanding of distinctions in what we're doing as well. So all the workshops so far are with First Nations, but we also want to make sure that we're including Inuit and Métis voices. So there's a lot more expansion that we need to do around that. But then getting back to the point of having workshops or conversations with non-Indigenous fishing organizations as well. I think that's a really good point. I think it's something that makes sense that we would want to do what we can to share information and keep others informed. But that would probably be something coming farther down as a bit more information gets developed and put together on this. And another question I saw directed to us was if DFO is working with Parks Canada, or if we're drawing on anything that they have done around Indigenous data sovereignty. So I'm aware of some of the materials that they've put out. That's something that I am intending to circle back to look through that a little bit and see what we can draw on from there as well. We haven't had any direct conversations with Parks Canada. I have kind of heard a little bit. I think I've seen one presentation from them related to this. In terms of work with other departments, we have had some discussions with Natural Resources Canada. They're also doing work around Indigenous data sovereignty. So they're sort of interested in hearing about what types of results and progress we're making. So we are planning to continue the conversations with them. Also, Indigenous Services Canada is interested in having discussions, kind of sharing information. I mentioned as well, there's an interdepartmental working group. It's co-led by Indigenous Services Canada and Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada. So there is conversation between different federal departments. And I think that a lot of departments are similar to us fairly early on in terms of what they've done so far. So we need to keep having those conversations to be sharing information. But at the same time, we are trying to be, I guess, in a sense, cautious that we're not sharing information that we shouldn't be sharing. So when we're having workshops like this and people are contributing personal experiences and stories and things like that, we want to make sure that we're not going to share with other departments things that we should not be sharing. So we are trying at the same time to make sure that people are comfortable with what we're doing before we go out and have too much interaction with other departments around that. So it's finding the right balance, but definitely in terms of work that Parks Canada has done or others, I think it's important that we do make those connections. So it's not just each department working as a silo and then communities have to have the same discussions over and over again. So we want to try and avoid that as well. I think those were the only two questions that were directly for me, but if there are others, Mike, you just let me know.
So we do have some that are written here. So what I'll do, just for everybody, if you can give me some of your paperwork, I can read through it. And if that way you can maintain it, I'll just ask what needs to be done or ask towards you. So one of the questions that was asked that came was, Lee, can you tell us more about the Fisheries Act and how Indigenous data can be protected?
So I can't give too much info on that because I've only just kind of taken a glance through the act in terms of the clauses that are in there. That's something that if people are interested, what I could do is circle back on that one. I can have a look at the act and find the specific clause that talks about this. It's not entirely clear to me from when I was looking at it before exactly the scope of what it applies to. It's an area where I think that I'm also going to need to consult with our own access to information secretariat to try and get a better understanding of the implications of it. And it's a conversation I've been meaning to have with them. So what I might do is reach out and try and get more information on that. And then I can definitely follow up and share that information back to the group.
Next would be, from your perspective, how can Indigenous data be utilized by government for decision-making without perpetuating the marginalizations of Indigenous peoples by excluding them from participatory government / co-governance.
Yeah, so that's something where I'm hoping that we can actually work together to figure out what are the right ways to do this, because I don't think it's something where as DFO, we can make the decision to say, this is how that's going to happen. We need to have these conversations to understand what do you really want to see from us to make that happen. And then when we get a better sense of that, we can start to build that into policies and processes that should be followed, so that we kind of, the framework that I'm talking about, the data ethics framework, we start to build into that guiding principles to say, these are the things that need to be respected. These are fundamental rights and things that need to be respected in order to move forward with this. And then once we have those principles, then we can start to look at what are the processes to take concrete actions to put these principles into practice. So figuring out what type of guidance should employees and teams be following at the operational level to make sure that data is going to be used in a positive way, or that communities will be part of important decision-making processes related to their data. So I don't think there's a clear path for that right now, but I think that's a goal of doing these workshops, to figure out what is that path. So definitely, if other people have thoughts around that, we really want to hear that from you. How do you think that we should be pursuing that?
I think that's all the questions at this point.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
So we do have some statements and some ideas based on the question, which I will reiterate. Where do you feel that there is a need for better data management practices within the Government of Canada and DFO in its relationship with communities? So there is a microphone at the table here, so if the online viewers can kind of hear what's being discussed, if somebody could just simply sit there from the table who provided it and just kind of reiterate some of the ideas that you guys had, or some of the approaches that you guys were looking to take, that would be great, fantastic. I'm not sure if what's there is from your side or if it's from this side, I'm not sure. But if I can get somebody to kind of have those discussions and kind of lead it, that would be fantastic. Is that from your table? If you can just go to the microphone and just kind of talk about what was discussed and what are some of the ideas. Yeah.
Why
Go,
there's
go.
better need?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so where do you feel there's a need for better data management practices
practices
within the Government of Canada and DFO in its relationship with communities?
So minister has discretion to ignore science data. She has ministerial discretion to make decisions. So with our shrimp fishery, the minister failed to protect our rights-based access by ignoring science that showed that she should have reduced the shrimp fishery, and which resulted in the shrimp collapsing. So she ignored science data to maintain the economy and markets, which I get for people's livelihoods, fishers. But in the end, it collapsed the shrimp fishery, and let's say $1 million we lost because of that funds our communal benefit, communal need. Another one is racism. The minister works with industry groups, empowers industry groups, and the industry groups are actively trying to keep us Indians under the Indian Act. They sue in the communities. So there's an MSC program that the minister supports by providing fishing data. That gives a grade, and that grade is given to the fish industry. The industry then uses that to sell to markets, they'll buy it. But if you don't have that MSC label, you don't have, the markets won't buy a product. We have a license that the industry groups denying us access to the program, but the minister is still providing them data. So in the end, it's being used against, our data is used against us due to racism, because the industry group has made racist statements against the Mi'kmaq. And so the minister, basically the industry is putting a boot on us stepping on us and the ministers tying their shoe when they get, so. That's it.
So in that situation, and this will be addressed to everybody, in that situation, what do you? How would we feel, or what would we think would be a way to navigate that in a positive way? What would be, something that we could either propose or, implement to say, okay, this is an issue. How can we remedy this? Is it, again, just for general discussion and for those online as well? Is it something that, there is data sharing agreements? One of the things that was brought up, just again during conversation, was a third-party data management center, where everybody who wants access to data has to go through a third party, and then at this point, data is protected in different mechanisms in different ways. Is that a potential solution? Are we, thinking about, and again, having situations where unfortunately the data doesn't get shared, which is not something that, is ideal for anybody in that situation. But again, there are things that are being thrown out there, and again, discussions at tables, and for those of you online as well. These are things that are very, very important to, the process of, data sovereignty, and making sure that we have an understanding of realistically what we want as communities, what we want our data to do, and who has access to it. And I think a lot of this engagement question and a lot of the discussion that was taking place will be kind of readdressed later on when we start talking about care and OCAP. So it'll allow us to kind of dive a little deeper into how we can move forward, and what practices are already in place, and maybe some we can implement, maybe some we can modify. So I do appreciate the engagement that we did have. What we are going to do is we are going to break for lunch. We are going to have a discussion furthermore about desired outcomes and community goals. I'd like to have that as we go through. So while we're having lunch, continuously have those discussions, talk about what we would like to see as an end game for this process. How would we like to have our data utilized, and so on and so forth, keeping in mind again that we will be going into a lot of the OCAP and care principles later on, but it will be something that it'll allow us to again kind of give some ideas from our perspective on how we would like this to happen, and engage in healthy discussion. I would also recommend individuals online to do the same. Grab your lunch, stay at your computer, and chat with those individuals who are online. And if you do have any questions, our moderator has been fantastic in allowing us to collect them and provide them. So with that being said, I hope everybody enjoys their lunch. I hope that there is still more meaningful discussion to be had, and we make sure that we're collecting as much positive data and as much real data as we can. So thank you very much for everybody who tuned in this morning. We will be breaking for lunch. We will be returning for 1 o'clock. That'll be 1 o'clock Atlantic time. I'm not entirely sure where everybody is in the group chat. So again, thank you everybody for taking part this morning, and thank you everybody online, and we'll see everybody at 1. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. It is now 1 o'clock. We are going to continue with today's proceedings. I hope everybody's lunch was good. I hope everybody had time for meaningful discussion. I hope online was able to engage with each other a little bit more. So moving forward, we are going to go into another presentation by John Mervyn Vicaire, and it will be definitions and interpretations of Indigenous data. Again, online, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Individuals, if you have questions here, just write them down, and we'll bring John back up to do his next presentation.
Thank you, Mikey. So for this particular presentation, we're going to talk about definitions and interpretations of Indigenous data and Indigenous data sovereignty. Understanding Indigenous data and Indigenous data sovereignty is crucial for ethical research and respecting Indigenous rights. So what is Indigenous data? Simply, Indigenous data refers to all data about Indigenous peoples, including cultural knowledge, environmental data, and as well as health statistics. If we look to the Global Indigenous Data Alliance for a definition, according to them, it is data, information, and knowledges in any format that impacts Indigenous nations, peoples, and communities at the collective and individual levels. It is data about the land, water, air, soil, plants, animals. It is data about us as individuals, administrative data, legal data, health, social, commercial, etc. And it is also data about our traditions, culture, languages, knowledge systems, and more. So this is the Global Indigenous Data Alliance definition of data. But if we were to look to a Canada-specific example, we would look at the First Nation Information Governance Center. They define Indigenous data as First Nations data refers to all data about First Nations people and or data that impacts First Nations people's lives at the collective and or individual level. It is First Nations intellectual property, including historic and contemporary data, and it is also administrative data, survey data, including data generated through research activities. And we see some similarities with the previous definition. Data on resources and environments, such as land, resource management, referrals, wildlife, our history, geological information, titles, water information, and more. It is data about First Nations at the collective. Demographic data, social data, including our health data, education, employment, housing, infrastructure, and more. And it's also data from First Nations. Our languages, our traditional cultural data, songs and stories, literature, images, archives, ancestral knowledge. So that was just a brief description of Indigenous data. And I guess I'd like to reiterate that Indigenous data is data that we collect as Indigenous people, Indigenous organizations, and communities. If we were to go out and collect data on the water, be it water temperature, air temperature, that's all Indigenous data. It's not simply data that refers to stereotypical Indigenous, whether it's how many teepees are there and how many feathers and how many this. So it's much more than that. It's basically all data that we generate and that we provide. So what is Indigenous data sovereignty? Again, we're going to go back to the Global Indigenous Data Alliance for their definition. And according to the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, Indigenous data sovereignty means Indigenous communities control their data. It is crucial for maintaining cultural integrity, supporting self-determination, and ensuring data benefits the communities. It derives from the inherent rights to govern peoples, land, and resources. Its roots are in our traditions, roles, and responsibilities. It's positioned within a human rights framework, court cases, treaties, and our recognition. And knowledge belongs to the collective and is fundamental as who we are as people. So that's from the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. There's another definition that we're going to look at, and that's from the United States Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network. Their definition of Indigenous data sovereignty is that Indigenous data sovereignty asserts the rights of Indigenous peoples and nations to govern the meaning, collection, ownership, and application of these data about their peoples, lands, and cultural practices and resources. Indigenous data governance enacts Indigenous data sovereignty, providing mechanisms for ensuring Indigenous peoples' rights and interests are reflected in data policies and practices. So basically, in summary, understanding and respecting Indigenous data and Indigenous data sovereignty is essential. We must ensure that these principles are implemented in research and data management to support Indigenous self-determination and cultural preservation. Basically, a very quick walkthrough of those two, Indigenous data and Indigenous data sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So, firstly, moving through our agenda, we will be engaging in another engagement question. So, similar to what we did before, let's get some stuff on post-its. Let's write some things down. So the question moving forward is, do the definitions on Indigenous data and Indigenous data sovereignty fit your personal, community, and organizational context? Do you have any different interpretations or ways of understanding these concepts? So I would also like to ask just a little addition to the question and kind of jot down what Indigenous sovereignty means to you. Not necessarily do the definitions fit, because if they do, that's great. But if there is any additional information you want to provide, any additional suggestions or themes or ideologies that you want to include, I'd recommend you take the time and put those onto paper too, because I think that would definitely help the process and help us where we'd like to get. So we'll take another maybe 10-15 minutes and go through that process, and then we'll come back again and have further discussion on this engagement question. So again, to reiterate, is, do the definitions on Indigenous data and Indigenous data sovereignty fit your personal, community, or organizational context? And do you have a different interpretations or ways of understanding these concepts? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave some of the definitions up so you have some point of reference, and we'll come back in about 15-20 minutes. Thank you.
When we talk about the any information technology of intellectual property idea. And in terms of Indigenous sovereignty, I would say is just having the ability as Indigenous peoples, communities, nations to be able to participate, steward, and control any data that is with or about them.
Sure.
It's your turn.
Yeah, it is in our hearts and minds, vision, context of our reality. John Chuck, if you can stipple the picture to the context of our, it's not like we're sovereign nation and we should be able to interpret what data is important to us. And yeah, it could be, it's everything. Pinpoint which to science or for management, enforcement. Wait, everything now. But it's like laws, Although the Squishable Lobster Law, salmon law, there's a statement that says that if there's ever a disagreement, context of our oral traditions and our realities will be taken over the DFO's interpretation of our law. Community come forward and puts together as what's important. Data.
What is Indigenous Data Sovereignty?
What is the data itself? Okay, yeah. I think it's more like a legal context and then the oral tradition context, but it goes in the context of our realities, they get like it's like we have rights, but at the same time we have oral history, traditions, and sovereignty. So those two are how you look at it, I guess, but they're all we're mismatched, right?
I think the legal thing is still very new to us because anytime dealing with data, usually you collect data because you want to learn about it. Our people have always learned from each other by spending time with each other in long periods of time and doing things with somebody that's, you know, like say John's fisherman. If I go fish with him every day and just spend time with him every day, I'm going to learn how to become a fisherman through spending that time with him and earning that knowledge by giving, you know, like time, not just going up to him and saying, I want to know everything, you know, and write it down, get on with it. And when we're doing that for since time immemorial, we've never had to collect anything with the legal anything in mind because never had any threats of anything being stolen. We were never collecting knowledge for profiteering or anything like that or financial gain. We would usually want to pass that down or learn from somebody else on how to keep sustaining our way of life. So there was never a reason to have that distrust. I think that's something that's new for me. I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but for myself, that's how I feel.
I feel like too, sometimes it's tough because a lot of our data is based on qualitative knowledge as opposed to quantitative. So it's like we have a hard time in research, like when it comes to, we have a lot of data, but a lot of that data is based on observations and experiences as opposed to what Western science likes. It's a lot of numerical or numbers. So I think that's one of the things we have a hard time with. It's like our data is not valid because of that. And that's the impression that I get is the qualitative part as opposed to quantitative.
Like the context of our reality, like our experience, different. That experience can't be put into a data point and more like a story or like I'm struggling. I'm trying to teach kids philosophy and ethics, and I have a hard time with it, and I couldn't put it into words. And after I realized some things aren't taught, we get to experience them. So like death and grief, you can't teach that and write about it. Someone has to experience grief on their own personal level to really understand what it is. So that's kind of more context of reality. Our relationships we have with each other and our community realities and growing up and pride and our fights and our those are all the context of what we grow experience every day. You can't, to me, that's like a little data. That's a form of a data or reality.
And I think the way we see, the way we view, it's at odds, let's say from a Western times or from a Western perspective, data has the highest confidence level. You know, they're making decisions, well, okay, well, we need the data. But if you have data and then you'll have like observations and you know, as you go down in confidence, stories are, you know, probably at the bottom. Oh, that's just hearsay. The story, it's not as good as data from a Western perspective, but from an Indigenous perspective, you would flip that, and our stories and traditions and those have a much higher confidence level for us, And really, when it comes to data, it's less important. So it's an inverse of what Western values, Indigenous value in terms of recent knowledge and information. Flip it upside down. Yes. Let's say, where's the data? But then if we have observations and stories, well, that's not as important, can't use that. But meanwhile, we've been using that for thousands of years.
Then we do that also back to like, you can tag fish, keep dying, tag more fish, just count more dead fish. We don't question this, why are fish dying and why, like the nature of what we do and the challenge in the system, the reality of like, but getting more data versus we're putting all the effort into trying to study it more rather than, oh, we have to change our behavior, or change some practices, or change the system, or change. So those are, question that system, or just collect more data and understand why is the planet heating up? Let's keep measuring the temperature instead of like making change.
Indigenous data to me also isn't always data by killing something. And you can get just as much data by observing over a longer period of time how something behaves, its environment around it, how it's behaving in that environment, the time of year, when it arrives, when it leaves, what it eats, its predators.
And it's also important too, because our data, a lot of it's based on what's important about it is we notice the long-term changes that are happening instead of what's happening right now. So we're able to see the changes not only from right now, but also over time, which I also think is very important to acknowledge.
Yeah. Go through and teach it, you have to experience it. Understand, you have to take in when you're making decisions.
Yeah. Like if you went fishing with an elder or someone who's been fishing for years, and compared to just asking how they do certain steps, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you because it's second nature to that to them whenever they're fishing. And if you were to be on the field with them, you would know those little nuances of their tricks, how they place their nets or how they fish the rod. Compared to just asking how to do it. It's just second nature.
By the language program, first language speakers have struggled teaching second language speakers. They found that second language speakers are better teachers for second language speakers because they had to learn to go through it. And first language speakers like that's just how it is because they're the side of it.
But to your point, when you go on fishing, setting a net, we don't realize it, but when we're doing that, we're constantly taking in different forms of data and making decisions on the fly. It's not just about, okay, well, I always fish in this particular area, so every day I'm just gonna fish the same way. No, you have to, based on, well, what's the wind? What's the wind direction? What's the current direction? Where's the current going? What time is it in the year? Because at a certain point, you get different fish, you get much more seaweed, or you get different things. So you're constantly taking in data and making those decisions as you go, but we don't really realize it. It's going to rain. So there's so many things that we're taking in, analyzing and processing, and making those decisions based on that quote unquote data.
Yeah, like how data trends tell a story. It's particular that is like where stories can also be that reputation of long-term. So it's kind of a, and what's the value of like seeing, observing those changes? Like, again, like, why do we observe long-term changes? Do they actually mean anything in the context of like what we're doing? Like I said, more definition, like, oh, you see trends from the 70s, and does that really mean any, I don't know, that's like a weird, can't explain it.
Well, like, I'm pretty sure we all heard stories from people, because I heard that, like from bees and hornets, the hornets nest on top, can be a bad, to the bottom would be other. Or my grandfather used to go, hazelnut, if there's a lot of hazelnuts, there's one thing like that, lots of hazelnuts, it's a bad winter, it's not much, then it's gonna be not. It's something like that, heard that. Pretty sure we all heard stories from, like, everybody, that if that's gonna happen, this is gonna happen. Sometimes sure enough, that actually happens, because they experienced it, just keeps going from ancestors to ancestors. That's
That way.
something like that, it's sad, one.
No, this year will be bad. It's supposed to be bad.
What's the data?
Oh, that's
the squirrel telling us.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because they're more in tune, but
They are more, exactly.
they know what's gonna happen. They look at more small things than we do. In things locked up and.
I would just go back to the data loss of plant knowledge. I like relying on pharmaceutical advice rather than like the knowledge we have of our medicine from territory, like kind of the lost art. Fixing the different plants.
Pharmaceutical companies probably took in probably a lot of traditional data on plants and then monetized it and then made it part of their intellectual property.
Yeah, definitely.
Think of. It's like one of the compliments it's derived. We have knowledge in the States, think of the buckets. It's a big company. Also gas.
That's the sovereignty part of it, is it the right to define what is Indigenous data? The right to define how those principles of OCAP can be applied to a specific data set or type of knowledge. So is that sovereignty? What does that look like?
Sovereignty, yeah, that's that ability to make decisions for our governors, to make decisions for ourselves. And our interpretation of the data. All right.
Indigenous data can't just be extracted or utilized or shared with government. Because then if Indigenous peoples aren't at the table, at the decision-making table, well, it is data assimilation. It is marginalization. Oh, we'll use your data to inform our decision-making, but you can't sit at the table to make the decision.
Yeah, that's why we call partners.
Yeah.
We call someone a partner. Yeah.
Ooh, choose.
Zipper.
Yeah. Hold on. Two one.
Yes.
So With that being said, I don't think beyond that, I think it'd be possibly time if there's no other discussions to take place or there's any other data, we can move into discussion of OCAP and care principles.
Could I ask a question quickly for the group?
Of course.
Just curious about one of the things that was said about how oral histories and experiences are receiving less value than what's considered kind of the quantitative data. And I'm wondering if you see this as something where do we need to broaden our interpretation of what is data to include those other types of experiences and information? Or should we be thinking of other ways to include that in decision-making processes outside the context of data? So would it be appropriate to think of those things as data, or is that something else altogether?
Yeah, and it's just a word, a lot of implication to be in behind like, that information there are many avenues of quantitative, qualitative.
I think overall too, we just want our data to be as equivalent as Western science. Basically like having no hierarchy, just having the higher ups consider Indigenous data just as much as they do Western science. That would be my opinion.
That's definitely a good question because I was thinking about it, data can be boiled down to, let's say ones and zeros, quantitative. But let's say if it's data and you add a little bit of context to it, it becomes information. And then if you add some experiences to it, then it becomes knowledge. So I think there are some differences there, and so I don't know how it fits in with the whole conversation of Indigenous data. But yeah, I do know that traditional knowledge is being recognized more and more by the courts. So perhaps there's a way there where stories can have that same weight as quantitative.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I just wanted to build a bit off what Lee asked and whether there's a distinction between Indigenous data and Indigenous knowledge. Are they the same, or is there a space where the two are different from each other?
I can see some differences. I think I mentioned, we talked earlier, if we go out and we take some water temperature. If we just look at just the temperature itself, you can say that's data. But I think if we start adding more to it, then we start building upon that understanding. Perhaps we can say, well, then why is the water so warm? Well, then perhaps we can say, well, it's either getting warmer outside, or water's more shallow. So we're adding a little bit of information to it. And then over, I guess, repeatedly doing that activity, and then slowly becomes knowledge. So I personally, I do see perhaps some differences in that. Just simple data, or if it's something that, well, data, but we're complementing with knowledge that's been accumulated for thousands of years to help explain those numbers.
Pretty much so. Data can be data, some people get it. Knowledge is something that takes a lot more time to learn. I almost think about it in the hammer and nail concept. Data is the nail, knowledge is the hammer, but in order to build, you need both. And so they're different but the same. They're necessary in order to move forward. Because again, if you have a bunch of nails but no tools to utilize them, which would be your knowledge, then what you see, which is kind of the situation that we're in at this point. I would think we have a lot of data, but we don't have tools and the autonomy to utilize said data to push us in the direction that we want to go.
In that case, you have to develop a new.
Then at the same time, can we just throw a bunch of nails to somebody that doesn't have the tools to explain? And then they can interpret or build the structure really crooked and not in a good way, because it didn't include the people who actually generate that knowledge or have the tools to actually interpret those names.
And like
Going
I
down
said,
instead of one.
data quickly, like you just said, quickly.
Yeah.
So knowledge is something that's always gonna take time. You can rush knowledge. You're gonna get a cheaper version of it, or more time to spend acquiring knowledge and earning knowledge. It's gonna be more valuable.
Yeah. I think that's a really great reason why for these decision-making processes, it's so important to have that kind of equal value in terms of what's being contributed. Because if the department is just looking at data that it has, we don't have the full ability to make proper use of it. So everyone needs to be participating so that that value comes out.
I liked what you said, John, about knowledge triangle, about you have data, it's got that context, and you not have informational knowledge, you can have more. And I didn't quite hear what you were saying, but I think you said if the Hornets are making a nest higher up, your grandfather indicated, I didn't catch what it meant.
So it's gonna be a bad winter if they make it higher,
Right.
and if it's a little lower, it's probably just gonna be like mediocre. But I was talking about my grandfather and with the hazelnuts, go up and we see hazelnuts, we pick them every time we go up there, you go there every week.
Okay.
And you would see if there's like every year just over experience, because he's like 90 years old, so over years to see, okay, so now there's this much. You know, like over the years, we just experience it.
So I was thinking, like, going back to the Hornets nest, that's data, that's a piece of information, but it doesn't have a context. Then you have the indigenous knowledge, which allows you to interpret it. And that the triangle, I think that you were referencing there, John, is you have your data, but then you have, the knowledge that's been generated over, millennia that can help you interpret.
Basically like indicators over time, noticing those type of indicators in the environment.
Like, maybe the same here in the East Coast, but when I was in the West Coast, there was a certain plant that begins to bloom. And at the same time, that's when the salmon as well. Certain insect comes up in the environment. At the same time, that was certain species. Yeah, that's not just our ancestors, but a lot of other ancestors picked up on that for thousands of years ago.
It's when a cormorant grabs on your car on the bridge, that smokes.
You get the nail.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all of that.
Over the years, I noticed whenever it's supposed to be really nice out, we'll see Craig on top of the mountain. With a chicken chart. Over the years, I picked up.
Knowledge is power.
He's not home, he's a problem.
It's just,
Oh, yeah. What you mean?
So again, if there's any additional stuff, definitely jot down, have it, ready to go for another time. Or if anybody thinks of any other, ways to approach it, let Lee know, we can catalog that as well. Unless we'd like to continue with discussion, or do we want to carry it on cap? Or in and around that time anyway.
One more thing that was quick to notice. On the field with we work with both sides, we have a protocol. And protocol based on adaptive DFO's protocol. But their fishermen fish differently, like they fish one trap buoy and our guys fish 5 traps a line. So protocol was like 1 trap per line and us like multiple, some of boats have 3, some have 5, some have 2. And so the DFO was like, no, you're gonna have to change your fish by this way. And we thought like, no, you're gonna have to change your data sets. We're not gonna, just because you have a nice trend analysis that's gonna be disrupted. We're like, no, we're not changing our fishing. You're gonna have to. So anyway, we worked in Midway and adapted their science protocol that they can now read our data set that they can use it for their continuation of their trends, but with just to try to maintain that nice data set and change. We said, no, we're not changing. Science has to change. Maybe the variable added or a point from this time onward is the new trend or new data set. Anyway.
Was it hard to get that changed? Did you have to fight
Oh,
it?
if they want to work with us, they had to. So but the time was trying to keep us in the, it was easier to status quo, right? So we had, the biologists have to figure out a data sheet that would work for us. Yeah. Be stubborn. Should work.
That's the final time.
That's a good story.
What's the view?
Was a mischievous beaver. Was a mischievous beaver that was punished. So. I don't know this one.
Other questions on?
Yeah, there's just going back to the chat here. We have one question where it says, does data need to be recorded on some form of media for it to be data? Or is an observation not recorded anywhere? Is that still data?
Tree falls in the woods, and they, no one there to hear it. Think so. I think yes, someone has to interpret it and be, otherwise it's,
Then it's information.
well, no. Everything exists and like, just because I didn't measure the temperature, there's still temperature, I think. Well, or is it?
Can data be shareable if it's not recorded?
Yes,
Someone has
it
to,
can be transferred
Could be that.
or away.
Would that be considered
Yeah,
media?
I guess so.
I mean, we do have audio, right?
Mhm.
That's a type of data.
I think the idea of data that's being explained in that kind of context is, well, it's tangible. For us as First Nations people, that's not always the case. It's not tangible there's no documentation of why the bee's nest is higher. There's no documentation as to why, again, fiddleheads grow at a certain time. That's where, as you discussed, that's your knowledge. That's where that time that you know why, when, where. And that's one of the problems I think that, in how things are going with First Nations people is that everything was oral, right? Told everything through stories. We told everything through, lived experiences and those types of things. So, audio, sure, but like in the slide, the fact that our stories it's data and it's knowledge. So it's something that mediums don't necessarily need to be as finite as we're kind of interpreting them like now. You know what I mean? Like it could be a multitude of different things. I mean, look at telling a story that about the mischievous beaver of Sugar, or that is now Sugar. That is interpreted over time and change. And if you look at that, and maybe not so much for you guys, but if you look at that from our perspective, what was the logo for the city of Hamilton for the longest time? It was a beaver, right? That was what that mountain was, right? That was in their signage, their logos, their everything. But that was the story that we had from thousands and thousands of years.
I think as you're talking, is data the representation of it. But if you're going out in the world, you see hornet's nest, fiddlehead, you don't need that representation. You're observing something that's there in the world, and then you can use that information to make decisions. So in that sense, you don't need to represent it, so data doesn't need to be reported. You become the information.
Human becomes the immediate.
Well, the human becomes the interpreter.
Yeah.
You become a hard drive.
Yeah,
You know?
well, the world is there, right? So if you've got the world, you don't need to represent.
Because Greg kind of alluded to this earlier, where, you're talking about all this stuff and we were able to sustain our livelihood for thousands of years without data, without anything tangible, without studies, without any of this stuff. And we knew when fishing season started, we knew when hunting season started, we knew when we were going to have a good winter. We knew that, if this was the sign that we got, that we needed to harvest early because we knew what was coming based on knowledge, no data, knowledge.
Even overfishing.
Yep, that was something that didn't happen.
A lot of it too is based on trial and error over time. It's not like we knew these things right off the bat,
That's not.
It comes from, yeah, exactly, knowledge over a millennia time.
Strawberries, hogweed. What's edible?
But yeah, and that's, how knowledge is generated. And, it's repeat observations over time. That's a scientific method. That's what Indigenous peoples have done since time immemorial. Repeat observations over time. What it is. It's causing a hypothesis and testing and looking at the environment response.
I think at this
That's
point,
scientific work.
I think at this point, and I think we might be biased as First Nations people. Until First Nations knowledge is considered equivalent, scientific data, we'll continue to have this conversation. Just because your vitamins or your ginseng group was made in a lab and put in a capsulated form, doesn't make it any different than when we were harvesting it, grinding it, giving it to our elders or to our sick or to our needy, right? Until it's on par and it's viewed as on par. We'll continue to have well, what is it? It's the same thing. We just use different methods.
For the Western knowledge, you knew what the fish are going upriver and where it spawns, but before that, we didn't know right away. We'll probably follow the fish and see where it went. That's all I'm talking about. That's
Context of each have their own, they're important in their own, involved in their context. Comparing them as equal to each other, maybe not the way to look at it. They both probably have a way. That's why what I see is you take the both. They're like toolbox in a sense. So now you want to limit just our knowledge to a tool, but how we make decisions and how we go by our experience. And, yeah, we try to advance. Humans try to always advance the use to survive. I think both play a role together. Just those involved with European continent, and some involved with in Turtle Island with different experiences of territories are different, the animals different each territories, the context of those involved. Today we're all coming together. But I guess it's the respect we talked about. It's like what knowledge and respect and used. And decision makers, how they make a decision, they don't respect that. That's the issue. Respect the value of our knowledge, or at least
It's not. It seems that it's not as good because it wasn't done by a university, or it wasn't done by somebody in a lab where they tested, you know what I mean? Like, again,
Like they don't measure like the value of, giving an offering and having gratitude. Efficient value versus how many fish did we get? What's the number?
Yeah.
So like the.
Going back to what you were saying, Mikey, about the generation of Indigenous knowledge. Over time, do you think data needs to be reported to be data, or do you think that, your ancestors observed data in the environment and used that to develop?
so, and that's kind of where I was going, where.
Yeah.
Until looking at it, that is it data that needs to be recorded, or is it something that could be just there in time, observational? That's kind of where, when we talk about it and mention two-eyed seeing, having a perspective of both. If they're on par, you'll be able to say, yes, this is the exact same thing as this. You know what I mean? Your studies and your data, well, we could tell you about that from, and it's an over exaggeration, but we can tell you about that when the wind blows too hard. We know that this is going to happen. You know what I mean? And that's no different than, let's say, a meteorologist. I'll use another, again, outlandish, where all of us have arthritis. We know when it's going to rain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's coming. And there's no scientific, there's scientific data to say, well, change of pressure and so on and so forth, but we just know over time, over experience. And, like you said, with the scientific method, it's over time, trial and error, it's trying things, it's seeing what works, what doesn't. We did the exact same thing. It was just done in a different way. That's not in a Western approach. Like I said, you're taking somebody who will go in woods right now, find a root, grind it up, put it in a tea, give it to somebody who's not feeling well. Or you can go to Walmart and buy it in full form and use it. You know what I mean? They're no different. They're gonna have the same result. This one was manifested in a different way. Right? So the idea of, does the data need to be recorded? I think for me, I don't know about anybody else, we should just be off the table and have them just, again, as equally as valuable. So when you go into a negotiation and you're talking with, at whatever level of government that, our knowledge on this matter is based on, stories and, is quantified by X, Y, and Z. It should be just as respected as if somebody came in with a bunch of data and sheets and Excels and said, well, this is what this is. Because it might not be the exact same results, but it'll be close. You know what I mean? Based on what's known.
I went to political science meetings where they argue, all scientists will come together and they argue, they all have different interpretations themselves. So each scientist has their own, like, one on a dragon for snow crab, but one boat was faster than the old boat they replaced, so all their data set was calibrated to the speed of that boat, and the drag and the angle of and they just went nuts over it. They thought, the angle of this boat versus this boat, when it lifts off the ground, catches 3 times more than that. Like, it was, I sat there like, wow, this is okay. They're very, so it can be interpreted through, like, so it's no crystal ball, there's no magic, there's no formula. It's human beings doing with their experiences into the work they do to make a decision. No magical.
Trial and error.
Yeah.
And what's interesting of those scientists like debating, well, they don't recognize their own inherent biases that they have in their interpretation, their life experiences, because as a scientist, you're thought to exclude your personal values, your story, who you are out of the equation, but it's always there. But
Yeah.
To them, it's not. And so yeah, it's interesting to.
Like a heart surgeon, that's what school of studying for heart. I would trust him more than Craig said. I have some knowledge on this and experience. So I have this role of things.
You have to put in the account too, it's like, it's intuition too. There are elders, sure scientists are gonna go, intuition. You know, that's an aspect too of the First Nation knowledge.
And again, that's knowledge and that's based on years and years and years and years of learning and seeing it and being like submerged in it. You know what I mean?
Arthritis, intuition.
Again, it's an example, but I'm sure that there's, you know, even something going as, again, outlandish and might not agree with me, but that, you know, somebody will say, oh, I got hyper, somebody's pregnant. You know what I mean? Like those old wives' tales.
Yeah.
Right?
Some.
Yep, but that derived from somewhere where over time that happened, and that intuition is not something that you teach. You know what I mean? We now in our generation and the way we live, it might not be the exact same how we do it because we've been, you know, conditioned in a certain way and with technology and accessibility and so on and so forth. But there are still people that kind of have that, like, oh, I got that feeling. You know what I mean? And we as human beings, we have that, like we have that capability to do that. How many times have you seen something and be like, I don't feel so good about this. I'm not gonna go, or I'm not gonna do it. Right? It should have as much equal value to a certain extent than, well, statistically, that clip is blah. I don't like it. You know what I mean? So accepting and kind of acknowledging that, you know, and again, like Denny said, there's times where, yes, you're going to need data, you're going to need specifics, you're going to need something very, very, you know, regimented. And that's just the reality we live in now, right? Because you gave the surgery, you expect, you're going to need somebody who really, really knows what they're doing, not somebody who's going to wing it. No, but there are situations where the winging will actually be just as right, if not more accurate than, you know, somebody who's throwing a bunch of numbers and data interpretations at.
At the same time, it's not like one's more right than the other, but in the two-eyed seeing is where like the story is completed as a collective by looking at both, you know, with both lenses, we can find the complete story. Because individually, maybe they're not a full story, but for the benefit of all, let's look at it together and complete the entire story and fill those gaps together.
Yeah, that's a complexity of it, like how complex, you can never understand a true ecosystem. Like so many variables, you never understand it. That's where you just make the best decision, you learn from, and you observe, you learn and adapt, and that's kind of how we humans are dominated here.
There's a few comments online. Thinking about how data needs to be recorded. Our knowledge is also embedded in our languages. It might be place names, species names. Those were not necessarily static, but they were, you know, they were defined as such. And so they were determined. And so it's interesting to explore about how these concepts that are being discussed in terms of data, knowledge, information is all expressed within the language, and how language has so much knowledge and context. That's a great point online. Here's another point. Here's a thought. Our brains are media for data. Experiences and thinking about it, organize it into a series of data that on another level is considered information that is then interpreted and becomes knowledge.
Right. Yeah, I mean, everything we know about the world comes from the brain, right? Like we think of our senses as like data, and the brain interprets it.
One last thing, maybe random thought, and not sure if we will discuss this either now or in the next sessions. I think about what we share on social media like Facebook. We share our data and knowledge on it, but through agreements and consent where we put information online, you know, it's kind of a bit scary when a lot of information is online or with AI, and then somebody can generate an interpretation with an Indigenous feel to it using AI. That can be scary as well. So how does Indigenous data sovereignty protect that? Or you know, who gets, yeah, how does the collective then like
Check against gossip.
yeah, or even AI, like, is this authentic? Is this not authentic?
I'm going to spiel about American politics right now, but that will. Oh, that's about.
Sorry.
That's ruined the brief example right now going on. Unfortunately.
Mute. All right, so thank you, everybody, for that great discussion. There was a lot of different things that came through, a lot of different ideologies, a lot of different, you know, ways to discuss and talk about things, or even just thinking about things, lots of notes. I thank everybody online for providing their perspective as well. So moving forward, we are going to have John come back up and give a brief introduction of CARE and OCAP. Just to let everybody know that this is going to be a brief introduction. We will be going more in depth, as John mentioned earlier, in the next workshop. So he's not going to dive right in. So just bear that in mind that it is going to be a general overview. So I'll hand everything back off to John.
Thank you, Mikey. So this one's going to be a quick presentation. I have just a couple slides. As he mentioned that in workshop number 2, we're going to be discussing OCAP and CARE in a little more detail. So understanding CARE and OCAP principles is very important for conducting ethical research and managing data involving Indigenous communities. Oops, sorry. So what is OCAP? So basically, OCAP stands for ownership, control, access, and possession. And it's a registered trademark by the First Nations Information Governance Center. So it allows them to exercise some control and ownership over its trademark. So these principles were developed, like I said, from the First Nations Information Governance Center to provide a framework for First Nations data governance. Ownership means Indigenous communities have full rights over their data, similar to personal property. It supports community autonomy and self-determination, protects cultural heritage, and can provide economic benefits. Practically, it gives communities it means communities can decide what data is collected and how it is governed. The control means that Indigenous communities control all aspects of their data from collection to dissemination. It includes deciding how data is collected, stored, and how it is governed. Stored and how it's shared. Access means that Indigenous communities determine who can access their data and under what conditions. Communities can establish protocols for granting access to ensure it aligns with their interests and ethical standards. And possession means that Indigenous communities physically possess their data, ensuring it remains within their control. This can involve strategies for securely storing and managing data to prevent unauthorized access. If we look at CARE, so some of you may be familiar with FAIR principles, which stand for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It's a standard, you know, it's these are principles for Western science to ensure that data can be, you know, it can be open, it can be reused, but oftentimes that sort of, it doesn't really work for Indigenous communities who are looking to assert data sovereignty. So the Global Indigenous Data Alliance and has come up with another set of principles to attach to the FAIR principles. and they're called CARE. So when we look at the C in CARE, it's for collective benefit. It ensures that data is used to benefit Indigenous communities collectively. For example, if we use health data to develop health programs, that ensuring that data supports overall well-being of the community. The authority to control means that Indigenous communities have the right to control the collection, access, and use of their data, and includes setting terms for data collection and deciding how that data is used and shared. Responsibility requires that data stewards act responsibly, ensuring data practices do not harm communities and respects community protocols. An example is ensuring data is not used in ways that could harm the community or misrepresent their interests. Ethics emphasizes that data practices must align with Indigenous ethical frameworks and values. It includes respecting cultural protocols and ensuring that data use honors the community's ethical standards. Basically, to conclude, CARE and OCAP principles are vital for ethical data management and empowering Indigenous communities. I encourage all of us to adopt and respect these principles in our work and to learn more. Walalia.
Thank you very much, John. So with that being said, we have come to the conclusion of workshop number 1. I'd like to thank everybody for taking part. Those of you online that took part, thank you very much for spending the day with us. I hope today was as informative as it was as fun as possible. So just a brief reminder that we are going to have another workshop that is on the 15th of August. Will be located here in the same format. You can tune in online, or you can come to the community center and take part here in person. We are going to be, moving through another set of agenda items. We will be going through OCAP and CARE a little bit more in depth. So if there's questions that you have moving forward, let us know. John had presented the agendas for all 3 workshops at the beginning of the broadcast today. So if you want to go through it, think of some questions, propose some questions, that'd be great. I believe we're going to try to get this accessible so that it can be rewatched for those of you who either tuned in late or came late, so it'll be accessible that way. All in all, it was a very great day. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and I would like to finally invite Roseanne Martin again for a closing prayer.
All I've been doing all day is getting up, getting down, and falling all over the place. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful to be back. I've had it's been busy all day. We're all down at the powwow ground getting ready for our upcoming powwow this weekend. So like everybody's running around like a bat out of hell. I can't run too much. I have to do all the ordering around, getting people to get this from me. Usually I do all my own work, but because of this vertigo, it's I think it's going to be with me for a few more days. So I thank the Creator for the gift of life, for allowing us another day on Turtle Island, and for all of us to be gathering here together. I'm sorry I didn't stick around long enough to find out what you guys are discussing and all that, but I am divided like here and there. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the gift of life. I thank the Creator for the awesome, the sun, the star nations, our grandmother moon. I thank our Mother Earth for everything that she has provided for us today. And I want to thank you guys for the awesome lunch that we had at dinner time, that somebody brought us down to the sacred fire. Our elder, Don H. Capelin, played a huge role in our community here. And today is the day that we are honoring him. There's a sweat there this afternoon for the family in his honor and all that. One thing Don H. loved was soup, homemade soup. So whoever made that salmon soup and the sandwiches and all that, we gave him a good feed today and all that. So we're grateful for that. Also to the eagle spirit that I called in this morning, guardian for the children and all that. I want to send those spirits back in a good way and to say thank you for everything that you have given us and all that. White Wolf, the grandmother that sits in the southern direction that brings us healing for the women and all that. I want to thank her also for whatever message that she brought to you guys here today and all that. And for our women who are sacred. I also pray for the women, our sisters, Grandmother Moon, all that is female, the four-legged, the two-legged, the winged ones, the creepy crawlies. I just gotta let you guys know we had 7 eagles at the sacred fire this afternoon. They flew back and forth, huge. I never seen the eagles this big this time. It's usually this time of the year, but they came, those ancestors came. So I want to thank the black bear that sits in the western direction, guardian for the men, our brothers. For those of you that are here today, the medicine that he has brought you, I hope you can go back and to be able to work with it and work amongst each other. And communication is the key. I thank the ancestor that sits in the northern direction, guardian for the elders, for all that that teaches us and all that, for the ones that are teaching in the schools, the ones that do the sun dances, the ghost dances, the sweat lodges, the ceremonies and all that, for the language. You know, in 1994, I didn't speak Mi'kmaq at all. And I made a determination to go back and learn my language, learn my culture, learn about our spirituality, learn about our sacred bundles. And this is how I started 31 years ago. Today, I speak fluent 3 languages. And I'm grateful for that. So I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come here today and for allowing me to share a little bit. Ha.
So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we will see you on the 15th.